It's the issue about predator New Zealand that I think some people find a bit unnerving is that it is such a campaign. It's a rah-rah campaign. The idea is to get everybody involved, everybody's got their traps, and it's community involvement, and it's a community building exercise. And I'm wondering if that worries any of the panel in terms of, I'm not going to use the word Nuremberg, but you know what I mean. It's a bit concerning that it's tapping the lower levels of human nature rather than the higher ones.
I think quite the opposite. I think it's wonderful that communities are getting together around this topic. It could have been anything, but this seems to be the galvanizing topic of communities. And when neighbors start talking to each other about their traps, like my neighbor recently talked about, they went over to dinner with friends, and I happen to live in Kiore, and 4 of the 5 couples are actively involved in conservation, laying traps in their backyard.
Comparing their kill.
Yep, they might have been doing that, but now they know each other. And so it builds resilience.
Oh, come on.
No.
Kill a rat and make a friend.
Yep. I strongly believe, we've tried for a long time, people always throw up their hands and go, modern society, we don't know our neighbors.
Couldn't they bake a cake instead?
They could.
Did they have to kill something?
Kim, they could bake a cake, but this was an organic movement. It was not top down. It's bubbling up from the community, and those that want to participate are actively opting in to participate. I think it's a fantastic thing that we couldn't engineer from a top-down level. And so 1 in 4, 1 in 5 families in these communities are participating. And from that will come great gains, from social gains, cultural gains, lots of gains.
I think there's another side to this, which is that it's been called a moonshot, and it is a moonshot. It's a huge thing. It's a difficult, expensive thing to do that will take a very long period of time. You can't do that without rah-rah.
And
you can't do it without people on board.
Also, we can't just approximate it right. I mean, as your comparison with the moonshot implies, we can't get halfway there and think, yes, we've got halfway to the moon. We have to go all the way to the moon. What do you say? We can't, if we go halfway, it's a massive fail, correct?
No. I think halfway, half predator-free would be fantastic.
Really?
But the problem, I mean, eradication is a special state in the sense that you don't have the problem of continual invasion so much.
But
so that's why, I mean, it's a great goal, because if you do achieve eradication, it means you haven't got the ongoing killing going on. You don't have to keep rolling out the traps and rolling out the poison. So it'd be fantastic.
So it would be a great thing if the half was the South Island. I'm from Dunedin, so I want the South. But it would be a great thing if it was half the country in that sense. It would be a terrible thing if it was half the predators across the whole country, because then it's baiting, trapping for the rest of our days.
Yeah.
Right. So you have to have a large area where you have literally exterminated all the possums, all the rats, all the stoats, all the weasels, all the ferrets, right?
Well, I'd say it'd be great, but a large area with most of the rats and the stoats and the possums would be pretty good as well.
But if you isn't it all or nothing with possums? I mean, are you saying there's a possum population that could be reduced to where it's manageable, more manageable than now?
Well, I think possums eradication is quite feasible. Based on the information we seem to have at hand, and pretty much seem to be at almost the situation already where we're down to those very low numbers in a lot of areas.
Okay.
So I'd say for possums, it's almost been achieved.
Carrying on as we are, we've nearly eradicated possums?
Somebody could speak to that a bit better, but I think you're probably looking at eradicating possums in the next 20 years.
Oh, 20 years, all right. I mean, we'll all be dead by then.
Yeah.
I was getting momentarily excited.
So is Bruce Warburton here to fill in the numbers?
Yes, he is.
Yeah, there you go.
And if on mainland New Zealand, outside sanctuaries where the boundaries are porous, if we do a good job eradicating rats, for example, will the mice explode?
Maybe. So yes, if rats are eradicated and mice left alone, at least in some forest systems we know that mice will pretty well explode.
Right.
So
what are the other unintended consequences of predator-free New Zealand as we see it now?
yes, mice exploding, things that
I know.
Things
It's a
that
good
eat-
image, right?
yeah, it sounds literal, doesn't it? You imagine all these little mice. So yeah, we've got some really interesting research is actually coming out about a lot of the effects that mice have, which aren't so conscious. So mice will be eating lizards, mice will be eating a whole range of invertebrates, mice are having a whole range of effects on vegetation. And this is really just emerging in the last few years, some really good research that's coming out.
Why don't we add mice to the list then and wipe them out as well?
That's not, that's a fairly complex question that probably some of the predator-free people might be better to answer. But if we go down the genetic road, which raises, of course, a whole other can of worms, my understanding is that mice might actually be easier than rats.
All right.
I'm not a geneticist, so I need
No.
somebody else to fill that in, but
Just
that's my understanding.
As a supplementary question then, when you talk about possums being possible to eradicate, are you talking about with some kind of gene manipulation?
No, I think with current
With
technology,
the current technologies,
Yeah.
you're sure about that?
I'm not sure, but I think, yeah.
Okay.
I'm not an expert.
It's a bold call. There might be somebody in the audience who would be prepared to add to that, but we'll come on at about 6:45 or later on. There are microphones there, and you can come up to the microphone and you can ask questions or even illuminate us as you see fit. Cilla, kiore, we've talked about the Polynesian rat earlier today. It's regarded as a pest by Doc, I think.
Most people would think of kiore as a pest. So kiore is the Pacific rat. So we've got 3 species of rats that are being targeted with predator-free 2050. So kiore is the rat that came with the ancestors of Māori on the waka. So they're found through Polynesia. They, because they came on the waka, for some people they have special value. And I think that there are 2 really important points here. So the first is that just because we know that some people do value kiore, other people not at all, what that tells us is that there's a really diverse range of value systems within New Zealand. So I think we need to acknowledge that kiore is just one example, but there are lots of other examples that we could use as well about how people have different values. So the question really is how do we deal with the fact that we've got these diverse values? And I think that's the question that's critical to go forward. So for the example of kiore, I think one of the issues that I go back to again is that we're in a shared partnership. And what that means is that we need to have conversations with Māori communities about what are their priorities, how do they see the costs and benefits within their local areas of the different initiatives. And I think it's really important not to see it as a black and white thing, that there are ways that we can talk to people and say, okay, I understand that you do value the kiore, but the consensus elsewhere is that we would like to get rid of it from most of the country because of the effects that it has on biodiversity. Are there some ways that we can actually negotiate or talk through so that we can find a solution that's going to suit your values but also is going to suit the values of this very large group over here that would like to get rid of kiore from many other places? And it seems to me, to say that it's just a yes or no, black or white answer is really to do a disservice to the whole idea of predator-free 2050.
So can you give me an example of how you could envisage people accommodating each other's views?
Absolutely. So, for example, at the moment we have a population of kiore on an offshore island that is co-managed by an iwi and by DOC as well. There's no reason, for example, that we might not keep kiore on that island. We might say, okay, we understand that this is important in your area, Perhaps we also need to have another island, a safety population, if something goes a bit AWOL at the first one. If we were to do something like that, that's not going to impact the majority of native species that we really want to increase elsewhere in the country. So that's just one example of how you could have, I mean, it's about talking to people, right? Listening to what their needs are, hearing what they might have much better ideas than I do, you know.
But if you wipe out the other rats, and what has he written?
Passing notes to each other.
If you wipe out the other rats, won't the kiore explode and become just as much of a predator, a peak predator, as everything else?
So there's a couple of issues here. One is there are actually very few kiore left on mainland New Zealand anyway. It's kind of, in a way, the rat that's been squeezed out.
Right.
The second thing is that there's quite a lot of research at the moment on kiore and mice and whether they compete with each other. So I don't think that it's very likely that you would get an explosion of kiore and mice.
Well, if the kiore has been squeezed out, then the squeeze will be off and it'll rise again, won't it?
Well, I guess we have to have
Another
those...
unintended consequence.
Yeah, that's right.
I don't think it's quite so relevant because most of the squeezing with kiore's already happened. So there's few or no kiore left. I think, and they're only just down in Fjordland, and most of the I know James could fill us in here. I mean, do kiore and ship rats coexist anywhere?
Not happily.
Okay, so the Great Barrier Stewart Island.
And so, in fact, there are so few kiore here that we don't need to worry about them being a predator at this point.